beautiful people. This is your girl Lovo at Afro Girl Speaks. Thank you for returning back to my channel. Before we get started, please click the subscribe button, like the video, and let's move forward into the content. Well, my new series that I'm starting in the month of August is going to be called I Fought for Her. In different stages of my life, I had to fight for me. I had to fight for who I am as a woman. I had to fight for who I am as a little girl. I had to fight for myself in different instances to become who you see today. And I'm still evolving, but fighting for myself and recognizing those stages in my life where I fought for myself is imperative. And I think once you recognize and acknowledge the importance of valuing yourself or pouring into yourself, this all comes together in this journey I call life. So this series is to empower us, is to allow us to know that regardless of what we go through in life, that your life is just a series of chapters. Some high moments, some low moments, but irrespective, it's all a beautiful story. So let's get started with I fought for her. In this instance, I fought for her in childhood. So to give you a little backdrop in terms of my upbringing, as I stated in my intro video, I'm originally from Liberia, West Africa. And so my upbringing was a combination of my Liberian culture, and my parents had to transition to the United States. And while they were here, our country, Liberia, went to war, and we had to start life anew in the United States. Now, with that being said, regardless of the fact we lived in the United States, I still always say I still had Liberian parents. So our cultural dishes, things that my parents held to a standard, things, expectation levels were not minimized just because we had to start anew in the United States. My parents were both advocates for education in all tiers, and also they were very big on the family unit as we grew up. Considering I'm the oldest of two sisters and two brothers, as well as I have an older cousin who's like an older sibling to me, the blendedness of my family and the big family that I do in turn come from allowed me to have a very joyous childhood. But in that childhood, there also were challenges. And this begins this journey of me fighting for myself in my youth. So when we came to the United States, unfortunately, a lot of people, some of the black kids and people from other backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, they weren't used to African children, particularly African children that look like me, okay? Some people look at me and say, oh my gosh, you're from Africa. Like, how can your hair be curly and coily like it is? Or you're from Africa, you're not what I thought you will look like or what you'll be like. You're from Africa, why do you talk so proper? Not understanding that my parents, I have a mother who's an educator, even though both my parents have accents. It didn't change the fact that they were big on us being English speaking students. And they were big on the fact that we were very successful in those endeavors. And so that's where my first challenge in childhood began. I had problems with reading comprehension. And unfortunately, I was held back not once but twice in second grade because of this challenge. And what happened in that instance is my sister, one of my younger sisters, got accepted into a specialty school that afforded me, a magnet school to be correct, in Connecticut, that afforded me the opportunity to attend, and because I was her sibling. And through her, I received the help that I needed because they gave me an assessment and identified my reading comprehension issue. So every time during the class session, when it came down to reading comprehension, I had to be assigned to a reading coach who in turn would work with me outside of my normal classroom activity to do more tailored one-on-one interactions with me. So a lot of people wouldn't perceive the fact that I, in turn, would have problems with not just reading comprehension, with even articulating certain words. And it started off my first reading coach, and I say I fought for her, and I'll say my mother fought for me in this instance too, because she would not allow them to socially promote me. Because as an educator, she knew the consequences for that if they socially promoted me and I was afforded the opportunity to be socially promoted, my schooling would not get any easier, and I was in the fundamental building blocks of understanding not just the mathematics, but she knew reading would get more complex and harder. It wouldn't get any easier. So if I didn't master the fundamentals, I would not be equipped to be successful. So my father was not favorable about that because he cared more about how others perceived us, but perceived my situation. The fact I was going to be older than some of my peers in the class, but my mother would not. She was relentless in allowing me to be socially promoted, and I thank her for that. But what delayed but not denied, I remember my pastor made a sermon about that, and that was my instance here. I was delayed a couple of grades behind my peers, but that was the best thing that ever happened to me. In the fight for me, my mother contributed to that, and the educators in which I worked with contributed to that. So the first reading coach that I had, her name was Mrs. Yacarino. And Mrs. Yacarino was well-traveled. She traveled a lot to European countries. She would share some insight with me about those countries. And we would talk about them and then, go into my curriculum about that. So it always made me curious about travel and all those other things, besides the fact I was from another country. Another instant. So what happened is I dealt with Mrs. Yacarino for the second and third grade. By the time I had to go and transition to the fourth grade, I received a new reading coach. This is my forever favorite teacher. This is the educator that changed the trajectory of my life. And her name is Mrs. Donahue. Mrs. Rosalia Donahue, to be exact. Mrs. Rosalia Donahue is such a beautiful soul because she owed me nothing and gave me everything. She taught me as if I was her very own child. She opened me up to to knowing that the gifts that were in me, locked up in me, just needed a little tweaking so that I could be proficient. So through Mrs. Rosalia Donahue, I became proficient in reading and writing. I wrote poetry. I got into drawing competitions. I won that. I even had my poem Life written into a young author's book called a young poetry author's book. And I came back to my elementary school. This occurred when I was in middle school, and I came back to my elementary school in turn to recite the poem called Life. And like every instance, even before I became a United States citizen, as a little girl, I wrote where I was proud to be an American, and I won first place in the competition. And there, once more, Mrs. Donahue was right there along with my mother and my siblings, cheering me on. The power of a great teacher, a good teacher, exceptional teacher, truly transforms lives. And I thank God for her each and every day. Because of her pouring into me, because of her caring enough to not discriminate against me because I was a little black girl and then a little black foreign girl, she treated me as if I was one of her very own. And I'm grateful. And as mature and grown as I am, Mrs. Yacarino had stayed in contact with me throughout the years. At one point, we lost connection, And she would always send me these beautiful postcards. And on these postcards, like a true teacher, had a smiley face and a little note saying, "Thinking of you fondly." Something just as simple as that. And and it was a picture of her and her family as they grew and evolved over the years. And we lost connection and regained connection about 4 or 5 years ago through Facebook. And I was just blessed to know that to this day, she still considers me my beautiful, young, intelligent Lovo. So, in fighting for her as a little girl, I too had to be a contributor to my journey. Although I didn't know what I didn't know, I was blessed to have a mother who fought for me in this instance in my life. I was blessed to have a teacher who interceded for me to be able to get to the levels of understanding and comprehension that I needed to. And because of those things, I remained an honor roll student through middle school, high school, college, and even for my master's degree. I say this to say, do not ever let the challenges of life, regardless of what stage it is, hinder you. Another instance of fighting for myself, not just in the education sector, is I'm from Liberia. I had to fight back the stigma of what people felt that African children looked and acted and responded like. I had to deal with the taunts of people calling me, back then, African booty scratcher, and having to defend myself and put respect on the fact that regardless of that I come from Africa, regardless of the depiction they put on TV, that was not my childhood. I came from a beautiful, loving, and big family. And I had to change the narrative of how people try to define me and let them know, no, you're not going to bottle me up, because I'm more than just where I came from, and I'm more than just my setback of being held back twice in the 2nd grade. As a child, that's a lot to overcome, to be able to accept. When people aren't accepting of your culture, they're not accepting of who they expect you to be, their perception of you, and then you having your own internal challenges and journey that you're trying to get overcome and prevail over. So I'm really going to this series because I think somebody needs to hear it out there that I don't care what your life looked like in the beginning. I don't care how challenging it is. And I don't say that to be cold and to say your beginning, didn't have an impact on you. I just want you to know that it's not about how it started. Some people have challenging beginnings where their childhood was horrible. I know folks who have endured. But the journey right now is a beautiful journey, because they never gave up on themselves. So the purpose of this series that I'm starting this month is for empowerment and to remind you that regardless of your age, you can still fight for you. You can still fight for you. And others can fight for you too. So thank you for allowing me to share this quite brief, but little snippet of my life in terms of how something so simple as reading comprehension, if my mama didn't fight for me, my educator didn't fight for me, and I didn't fight for me, it would have changed every element of my journey. It would have changed so much of my journey because it was a fundamental building block. And you know what? Delayed but not denied, because even though I was held back twice in the 2nd grade, even though I was older than some of my peers, as I went through the trenches, I met some beautiful people along the way, and I was meant to meet them in this thing called life at the time that I met them, because that is the journey that God had assigned for my life. and it's okay. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me as I share something so personal and so close to me. But I celebrate each chapter of my life, and I want you to do the same. So please subscribe, get connected, click the like button, and I look forward to connecting with you in the next video. Bye.